We are live. I think we're live. And the way that we would know that is that there's like a little eye bubble thing over here, up here in the corner.
Nice.
Is my computer frozen?
I can still see you.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. So yes. We are live, and that's awesome. So as we're waiting for everybody to stream in, I know very little about I know very little about Bitcoin. So just as a warning, I'm gonna sound like a total fell off the moon, doesn't know what Bitcoin is. I invested in Bitcoin a while back because my friend Daniel. Just as a warning, I'm gonna sound like. Told you I would sound like a boomer. I would be a boomer.
That's amazing.
So my friend Daniel, you know Daniel, right? Daniel Bostic.
I might.
He was at Ali's event.
Ah, okay. So I met him then.
Yeah. He's the blonde guy who spoke a lot. He's speaking at Stop the Steal.
Catholic.
Yeah, he's
great.
Yeah, he's cool. He's
his kids are amazing.
Wait, Daniel is the blonde guy, the
older one or the
younger one?
Okay. Different guy. Got it.
Oh yeah, I know who you're talking about. It was yeah. So I don't know the other guy so well. The pastor, right? Who was
yes, yeah.
Okay. Anyway, Daniel told me to buy Bitcoin. He's like, everybody has to have Bitcoin. You have to have at least $1,000 in Bitcoin. And so, of course, I bought it. And he's like, the one thing that you have to know is no matter what, don't sell it.
No matter helpful advice.
I had a friend who was getting into it back when people were mining them on graphics cards.
Sure.
And he was doing that probably 2010, 2012, something like that. And I just remember having a conversation with him back when it hit $100, and he was freaking out, and he was like, "Man, I'm going to sell this," and he probably sold 10 or something like that, and that was a lot of money for a high school student. But I've asked him, he's like, "Yeah, I've lost a few wallets, and there's probably a few dozen of them." But anyway, yeah, you can't focus on that.
Yeah, and
everyone has multiple friends, or at least one friend that has done this. If you're a millennial, and for me, I probably have a few notorious ones. There's a guy that I work with who, very technical guy, very competent guy, developer, and he famously lost I want to say over 10,000 Bitcoin. Super early on, but he was just trading. Back in the day, there weren't really exchanges, so you would go and meet someone in person, and he accepted cash in person, and then they send the money, and then of course they're over Wi-Fi, so it was not a good situation for him. And then he posted about it publicly to make it all worse, so now everyone knows him as the guy who lost tens of thousands of Bitcoin. That's all right. He can work, and it's a little unfortunate that happens to people, but I don't look at it as a negative. It's yeah, I mean, if people are happy making 10x and they sell, good for them. And I'm more interested about the technology than I am about number go up.
Right.
But number go up is cool too. It's what all Bitcoin Twitter is about. It seems what everyone tweets about, what all the YouTube videos are about. But to me, it's the technology that's really interesting.
That's just it. And
that's the most important part. And that's the part that I actually don't know about.
Yeah. I mean, and I'd like to get more into the specifics, but I was wondering about your opinion on a lot of people in China in particular are using it as a way to get their money out. And that's one of the big things. So they don't care if they lose 50% on it.
Get their money out of where?
China, because there's massive restrictions on foreign capital, and capital flight and stuff. You can't take more than 50 G out of China if you're a Chinese citizen. So I know China opened up because they wanted to become the global currency a while back. They opened up for like a couple months, and over $1 trillion fled China like overnight.
Whoa.
And they were like, okay, we can't do this, and they locked it down. But I mean, they're
Yeah,
still
that's what
illegally
happens.
doing it through like using Bitcoin and other cryptocurrency.
Based.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that definitely happens. So the particular use case that I'm interested in for Bitcoin is that it's censorship resistant.
Right.
So if you make a transaction in Bitcoin, it can't be censored. A few people know this, but this was actually the original vision of PayPal. So PayPal wanted to not just be a payment processor, but they also wanted to be a currency, at least when it was like Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, like small group type shit. But they really quickly realized that being a currency was kind of hard. So they dropped that. But yeah, I mean, you can make payments on Bitcoin and it can't be censored. Now the problem, I mean, I don't really care about people trying to get money out of China. That's not my problem. But I could see if you were the government, how you would view that as problematic. That being said, there's nothing that they can do about it. So yeah.
No, do you think that could be a positive driver of change in a lot of these third world countries with totalitarian governments?
You know, so I talked to this group fairly recently in Venezuela, and they're great. They're like, it's like the one balance, like they're doing like the Venezuelan Bitcoin podcast out there. They might translate my book into Spanish, and they're great guys. But one of the things that struck me, I was like, so like, how is it like being like the Bitcoiners in Venezuela? And, you know, without getting technical, the government is doing as much as they can to try and take over even the existing miners there, because electricity is free. So it's like, if you're mining, the government sort of views that they have control over it. They might have money in Bitcoin, but they still go to the grocery store and they can't buy anything.
Right.
So it's kind of helpful. It's kind of not. And then even with COVID, it's like now they can't buy anything and only one person can go out of the house. Yeah, I mean, having more money is great, like kind of in theory, but if there's no market,
right,
everything you have to do is still black market there. So I don't know. I mean, gosh, those are some really tough people.
Yeah.
They all have a very positive attitude, but I don't know how I'd handle it. I think I would have to leave if I were in that situation.
Yeah, I don't know why they don't try to get out.
Well, this is my understanding of it, but if they were to get out, they're basically like, they have no they have to get refugee status. And if you have a whole family, see, it's like a lot of single men without ties that can make it out and like try and get refugee status. But when it's not just you have to think about, it's like you, your wife, and your kids, and you feel more tied there.
I just met a refugee from Venezuela, and he was a single man without kids. So,
yep, there you go.
Yeah, met him in the UK.
Wow.
Yeah, I don't know how it works. Like, I think technically you're supposed to stay in the first country that you enter into, but then obviously you can apply for refugee status in different countries. But like right now with COVID, it's probably even harder to do than usual.
Right.
So now would not be the time, but like, when is the time? You know, the time was years ago, I suppose. Now we're finding out. Well, I don't want to get too much into politics, but I was listening to Trump's legal team. He's talking about how the Dominion voting software was used in Venezuela as well. And I'm like, that's really something.
Wow.
And so who owns Dominion? Is that like a Democrat thing? Or sorry, I know you didn't want it to be political. I just I hear about it a lot. Like I'm seeing Dominion like voting, and I'm seeing people text about it in like group chats and stuff like that. And I'm like,
I think we have to wait for more evidence to come in, because they're saying that for that particular lawsuit that'll be filed early next week. So that'll include like affidavits from people inside Dominion, and like for a lot of what I read right now, I assume is sort of gossip until I see the real deal.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in the same boat. Like I'm agnostic on it until we see the court documents a little bit more. But
it's just right around the corner. We don't have to wait too long.
Yeah, they're expediting it, so we'll find out soon enough. And yeah, I guess getting back to it, like, could you, for people that are unaware like myself, could you kind of like break down like Cliff Notes version of what, you know, how does the blockchain technology work?
Yeah. Okay. So,
and that's also what Bitcoin Clarity is about, which I also that should be next on my.
That's on our reading list.
Yes.
Yeah, I think the book is really good. Obviously.
And I included it. Sorry to interrupt you. Sorry. I included a link to the book for everybody who wants to read it. It's in my YouTube channel description. So go over, and I guess we're not on Periscope. So if you're watching this from Twitter, go over to this link on YouTube in the description of my YouTube video.
Yep.
And you'll see it.
You can also you can search on Amazon at like Bitcoin Clarity on Amazon, and you'll find it that way too. And I do think that the value of the book is really my belief is that I want to give people the mental models to understand complex systems for themselves without just telling people to buy Bitcoin, because telling people to buy Bitcoin doesn't serve me, because then they're just going to sell it. If they don't understand why they bought it and what they're looking for in it, then they're not going to act responsibly with it, in my opinion. There are a lot of different assets that you can buy where number go up. Like you can buy house, you can buy equities. Like it's not just Bitcoin. Bitcoin didn't create this new magical thing that you can buy low and sell high. This is not uncommon. What's really, really uncommon about Bitcoin is its ability to allow you to make payments that cannot be censored. So before I talk a little bit about how Bitcoin works, I'll say, like, I remember I had a roommate once who he ran a stoplight, right? And and there's pretty egregious repercussions for that if you don't pay the fine. So, I mean, people do this all the time, right? In Chicago, they call it kind of like a poverty tax, where if you get a parking ticket, first it's like a $500 fine, and then it's a $1,000 fine, and then it's a $2,000 fine, and it just goes up and up and up. And eventually they take it from your bank account. Right. And this is fundamentally something that cannot happen in Bitcoin. Right. So short of someone actually physically being in your presence and you being the one to give it to them, it can't just be seized from you. A third party can't seize it from you. Something that other people might relate to is, speaking truth to power on the internet is a very dangerous game right now. Another way to phrase that is it's very dangerous to be right when the government is wrong. And what ends up happening is, as someone who's intellectually honest, as someone who enjoys reading edgy stuff, I've seen a lot of good people, many of whom I don't even agree with, end up being just banned from everywhere on the internet. And it's never just one, right? It's all of them. And that the use case for Bitcoin in that instance is, okay, well, I'll just, if my Patreon is deleted, or if I'm banned from Patreon, I'll just throw up a Bitcoin address. Now, that doesn't solve all of your problems, because some people won't donate in Bitcoin. I think right now it's still super niche that only some people use Bitcoin, and you're kind of targeting those people. But it allows you to have access to funds. And really, we talk about this whole free speech issue, and I say it kind of I don't really think that's the real issue. I think the real issue is deciding who has the right to live. And I say that really dramatically, but it's if someone is saying that you can't speak, right, and you're going to be censored from the whole internet, that's cutting off your livelihood for a lot of these influencers that make content and have their income that way. So, I think of people who may be more controversial. If they can't make money, they're done, right? And nobody gets to hear their content anymore. But with Bitcoin, you have a way to feasibly still survive. Right. And feasibly still do things like, write books, put out content, but it's not, it's good, but it's not good enough. I'm still really glad Bitcoin exists, but it's not going to save the culture. It might save you, but it's not going to save everyone. Here, let me phrase this another way. The risk of you personally being censored may be very low, but for someone whose entire livelihood exists in a way where, they do this sort of stuff, their risk is astronomical, right? So it's for those people that have the best benefit in using Bitcoin. Now, why do other people want to buy Bitcoin, and how does Bitcoin work? I think that it's really difficult to want to buy Bitcoin unless you understand at least some of how it works. Otherwise, you'll never trust it. So, the reason why I wrote the book Bitcoin Clarity is because I felt I was a libertarian who was very big into Ron Paul in 2012. And that was sort of my entry into the industry. But what I was realizing is understanding economics is not enough to understand Bitcoin. And there's like, I would go to bars and I would talk to people and they're like, oh yeah, I sold my house to buy cryptocurrency, and just like crazy stuff because number go up. And it's like, there's so many other things you could buy. It's crazy. So anyway, a lot of the Bitcoin books and a lot of the material that you'll read about Bitcoin are, I would say, extremely technical, borderlining autistic, where they're going to explain cryptocurrency by explaining crypto. Like, that is such a literal approach. It's like, you don't actually need to know crypto to understand cryptocurrency. So, you know, I can, in the book, I do very high level explanations using mental models instead of code, using the idea of like, if you can understand a lock, you can understand crypto without having to learn any more about cryptography. And, you know, personally, I made the mistake, because this was so long ago, that when I got into Bitcoin, everyone who knew anything about it was technical. So I'd go around and I'd be like, oh, well, I want to learn more about Bitcoin. And everyone told me to learn how to code, which I think is the wrong path. Okay, so what actually is Bitcoin?
Also scares people away.
Yeah, it didn't scare me away because I'm weird, right? But we can't rely on, we want to help more people than just the weirdos. I think everyone who's weird has already adopted it, and we kind of need to bridge out a little bit further. Yeah, so I don't think you need to understand technicals to know Bitcoin, and I do think there is value in understanding how our economic system works. But the real kicker for me is the anti-censorship. It's a censorship resistance. So why would you want to buy Bitcoin, right? I think most people know that it's like capped at 21 million. So this is a concept that I'll spend some time explaining, but like, the question is like, why wasn't that invented before? So like, when you open up an app, your app is written in code, right? And that code could be hacked. Like we were just talking about, like Dominion software. The code is basically just a language, just like we're speaking now. It's just a language. Right. The difference between code and cryptography is provably and mathematically secure. So the cryptography means that it's not hackable, right? And then when you implement that in code, the code is hackable, but the math isn't. So it's like at the bottom layer, you have cryptography, then you implement it into code. The code's hackable, but you know, there's some pretty battle-tested cryptography out there. Okay, so Bitcoin was the first cryptocurrency that was able to create scarcity digitally. Like, this was the technical problem it was trying to solve. It's like, if I take $10 out of my wallet and I hand it to you, you have the $10 and I don't have it anymore. But there was no way to do that in the internet when they were creating, you know, not just Bitcoin, but also PayPal, as we talked about earlier. There was no fundamental way to do that. The reason being is like, there was no way to know that if I handed you a file, forget that it's money, just like like cat gif, right? Whatever the image file is, whatever a text file. If I sent it to you, there was no way to know if I copied it first. So if I have money, it's a file that represents money on my computer. I can just print 1 million of it like it's a Sims cheat code and then hand it to you, and the whole system is valueless.
Like the Federal Reserve.
Yeah.
Like the Federal Reserve. Yeah. The problem with the Federal Reserve, though, is that they have the money printing machine, and you know, we don't.
Right.
Yeah. I think cryptocurrency is like the Fed's going, all right, kids, you can have your own money machine, but stay away from the real toys. You know? But yeah, I mean, so what the blockchain does is even though everyone can run a copy of the blockchain, it's all synchronized to the same state, meaning that when I send money to you and it passes on the blockchain, all the blockchains go, did she pass the money? Yep, she did. Okay, she doesn't have it anymore. And because even though there's multiple instances of these blockchains, meaning like anyone who's running the software has their own copy, we're all in agreement about what the state is. So really, like, it's kind of meta, but in one level, there's thousands of blockchains, and on another level, there's only one, and it's the one we all agree on.
And it's inherently decentralized.
Yeah, and that was the innovation. I mean, the cryptography that created Bitcoin has existed for at least 10 years before Bitcoin, but that was the key innovation that made Bitcoin what it is. And, you know, many cryptocurrencies try and duplicate that, but the fact that no one can censor you when you make that payment is what is so dope. You know, it's like you can send money overseas, no one can censor you. You know, how many people have like made tons of money in Bitcoin? Well, maybe you guys don't know this, but it's like if you're like the CEO of an exchange, it's a very common practice, sort of unfortunately, that people will just steal all the money, go to India, die, and then like now they're, you know, a billionaire. Yeah.
Right.
Like you think you can buy a new identity when you're a billionaire? Yeah, I think you can buy a couple. So not a problem. But yeah, I mean this is why in Bitcoin it's very important to like know a little about the technicals so that you can store it yourself. But then that kind of gets into, are you nerdy enough to ride the ride of like being responsible for your own money? Gosh, do you remember the woman who was coming out against COVID? Her name escapes me, but she was like an older woman who was talking about Fauci.
Oh, the doctor, the researcher lady, right?
Yeah, older woman, right?
Yeah, a black woman, right?
No. She's
from
the doctor.
North Carolina. The one from North Carolina, and
not a black woman. This one was a white woman, older. She was on Valuetainment. The video was censored.
Okay.
Anyway, there was this woman whose name I can't even remember because she didn't propagate through the internet enough. I didn't see her.
They made the movie with her, right? Plandemic, the movie.
It's possible. I haven't seen that.
Yeah, they made a whole movie with it. She's like a blonde lady, and
yep.
She's from the University of North Carolina or something like
and
that.
And she talks about how she had some of these original, you know, I'm not from the medical industry, so I don't know the terms, but she was sort of the one who made some of the key innovations that Fauci then took credit for, like when she was in university getting her PhD and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. Okay, so we know the story. I think it's Judy, something like that. Anyway, that woman was harassed, banned off the internet, off the face of the earth, and they came after her monetarily. Like she can't keep any money in her bank account because they just sued her basically out of existence, right? So she's living in almost abject poverty, according to her, right? And if you maybe we don't believe her, that's another issue.
No, I believe it. I know people that it's happening.
Right. So again, it's like censorship. The risk of censorship is very low for an average individual, but for the people who risk their lives to do this kind of stuff, to push the Overton window, to speak truth to power, you know, which is maybe an overused saying, but to basically do something risky because it's right. Obviously, everyone is going to come out against them, right? And like that, every video with her in it is banned. So it's no wonder I don't remember her name. But like, yeah, that woman would be served by owning Bitcoin. And you know, for other people, it's just number go up, but that's fine. And I think one of the things about politics right now that we don't fully understand is like, even at the beginning of coronavirus, like I was one of the most prepared in my friend group, you know, because I had the information a little bit more than normies did. Cause I think the media was sort of like, I'm not too sure about this, but a lot of the like edgier content was on it in January and February. We don't know how long this is going to last or how bad this is going to get. Like, we don't know how many more people are going to lose their jobs. How many more people are going to end up in the camp like her, where if you start to say like, hey, I don't think I should lose my business because of COVID, maybe you too are banned from the internet. And it's not a good place to be. It's not a good place to be. And, you know, if you have more general questions about like how to understand Bitcoin, I could talk about that. But I think a lot of it too is really hard to do verbally, because if I start to do it verbally, then you have to use like all these buzzwords that like don't quite make sense. So in the book, which I actually have right here, I should send you a copy, but like the whole thing is like illustrated so that, I mean, I'm a very visual thinker. Like I wouldn't be able to understand this at all unless I like saw it.
Right. No, I'm that way too. Yeah. And it's definitely like being somebody who's tried a few times to kind of like dive into it. And, you know, I have my one friend who's like, you know, very on the technical side, like computer science person, like really smart, but also like not able to communicate it to like a liberal arts normie like
sure.
me. So
I never understood it, but one thing that I noticed is that it was like it was always like in groups of friends. Like there were some groups of people, and I never understood it until now. Like, you know, the whole idea of why people are drawn to Bitcoin. But I noticed there's always like certain types of people, like DC people in general, like were not into Bitcoin.
It's against the existing powers.
Yeah.
Right. So like the people who are there are like communists and ANCAPs, oddly enough.
Yeah. Yeah.
everyone who's like anti-government because it's having power for yourself.
Right. And there is a very political edge to it, and it's understandable, but I think the types, it's a very typecast kind of thing where it's like, it's a computer's science, like, anarchist who's going to be talking about it generally.
So there's a chapter at the end of the book that I talk about this, but I forget who the quote from. It was someone from the Bush administration. I'm terrible with names, but he talked about like the category of unknown unknowns. So like, have you seen this knowledge matrix where it's like the things I know that are simple, things I know that are complicated, the things I don't know but could look up, and then there's the things I don't even know I don't know.
Right.
And that is the most interesting category because you'll never be able to Google anything that you don't know about. Right. And what I do in the book is like, okay, yeah, you know about Bitcoin and yeah, you know about the Federal Reserve, but there's things that only the like people really, the core devs is the term, but like people who are really working on the protocol know. And that's the kind of stuff that people wouldn't know to Google. Instead they go, how do I buy Bitcoin? But they don't know anything about Bitcoin. And, I don't blame them because it is hard to learn. Even though all this information exists and is out there, it's so technical that it's really not helpful. It puts people off. People wonder why the industry is like 95% male. It's like, I wonder why. And it's because males think analytically. And, maybe I'm being overly general with that statement, but like the idea of taking a system and breaking it up into parts is not necessarily the way women think.
That's interesting. Yeah, we were talking to a friend of ours the other day about like the video games industry, and I think a lot of these like computer technical intensive industries do tend to be kind of male dominated, and that is an interesting question as to why. But yeah,
probably a cultural thing in large part.
And I think it's when it's already that it's like a cycle, right? Where it's like, if it's so male dominated, I feel like a lot of women would probably not exactly be like, yeah, let me jump into this like 95%, not just male, but like
your friends you don't grow up talking about it with your friends. Like,
yeah. And like, not to be mean, because I like these guys a lot, but like, they're not exactly the most socially like affable people.
Well, see, we could say that this is like, whether it's cultural or biological or whatever it is, I think no matter what, it's a problem. And I'm not just saying like the male versus female thing. I don't think that's the issue. I think it's the way of analytical thinking that dominates all technical spaces, which is just trash. And like, an example I'll give is like, how many people took a biology class and like learned about like how the mitochondria powers the cell, and you had to like do all these advanced calculations about like what the cell is like, the mitochondria is doing to like power the cell, but nobody actually even learned like fundamentally what a protein is, right? It's like you learn all the technicals and you learn how to do the math enough to pass the test, but then like in a big picture way, you don't actually know what's going on. And like when I was studying Bitcoin to get into the industry, I thought about getting a CS degree, and I was looking at the degree and it's like compiler design, algorithm design. And I'm like, there's not one class on computer history of like, how did this whole thing evolve to become what it is? So the way that people think, whether, it's cultural, biological, whatever it is, people think that if you take a complex system apart, like computer science, and you break it up into all of its fundamental parts, that when you can reassimilate all of those parts into an understanding of the whole, which is fundamentally incorrect. And, we see this in tons of different industries. It's not just computer science. It's like I said, biology, any technical field, probably even law to some degree. So I could rant about law, but that's a whole other thing. I just found out the U.S. and Canada are the only people that have class action lawsuits. I was like, wow, this is that's very funny.
Yeah, I'm in the belly of the beast right now, so I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah, I'm in law school.
Yeah. Perfect. Yeah. You understand. It's like, if someone knows how to write a contract, does that mean they understand law?
Yeah, and not to mention all the problems with the legal system right now, and like, some professor thought it would be a good idea to interpret contracts this way when it means, okay, let me like cross out this section of the contract because I said so.
It's actually not. They have a fundamental misunderstanding of what it means to be. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've been watching a lot of the Amy Coney Barrett, and I was like, I'm kind of embarrassed about how much I learned in the process of watching her, because I was like, oh, I finally understand the difference between what it means to like be a judge or like, you know, be a lawmaker, you know, which is, I would have learned that in school, but forgive me, I went to public school.
That's just it. That's I think the root of the problem that we're talking about with all these fields. But we have a contributor. Thank you, Joe, for your contribution. Kiara, have you heard Max Kaiser? He has a show on RT that he created his own crypto called MaxCoin, and I believe there are many forms of Bitcoin. And
he's asking, is there any value in that? And thanks, Joe. That's actually what I didn't know about that MaxCoin, Max Kaiser. But I was thinking in general, like why, what sets Bitcoin apart?
Yeah.
Are these?
Yeah. So this is something that, I mean, you know, when you're in your own industry, you feel like you see the same things over and over and over again.
Right.
And you know, the story that you told about how like I have a friend and he lost Bitcoins, I hear that one all the time. The story of like, oh, I'm interested in Bitcoin, but what about Litecoin? What about X coin? Any other coin? Insert other coin here. Like this is where the meme like shitcoin came from, is because sort of stuff like
Bitcoin.
The meme, the mimetic warfare was really the best way to handle this question, because the answer is all money is an illusion, and money only has value to the degree that you believe it has value. The dollar is backed by nothing. It's, well, I shouldn't say that. The dollar is backed by our faith in the dollar. And, you know, I could have a particular belief in the dollar, but it's the collective, it's the sum total of the collective beliefs that matter and create the market value for it. So then I would punt the question to the market and say, well, what is the market value of Max's coin? Is he able to hype his coin? Does he have to market it for it to have value, or does it have innate value separate from Bitcoin? To compare, you know, I would say that his coin is probably not focused on the technicals and probably is more of like a brand building thing for him. I would say there are a lot of cryptocurrencies that like try and market themselves as being like a more technical, or like, you know, Bitcoin plus this, or Bitcoin minus this, or Bitcoin, you know, times this. Like they're all some iterations of Bitcoin, whether they share a code base or not. There's not an innate problem with that. I think there will be innovation in the space. I think what we're really undergoing right now is because we're realizing that money is this consensus hallucination. It only has value because we believe it has value. The fundamental things that we believe have value are scarcity. What is the scarcity of his coin? What are the values of his coin that are different than Bitcoin, right? So Bitcoin can do things like it's fundamentally it's censorship resistance. What other coins can't say that. So, you know, thinking about it this way is what we need to do in order to evolve our thinking. Now, this is new for us because we existed in a world where governments had currencies. And this is the first time where, oh, there's a free market of currency. Well, now I need to learn how to become a consumer of currency, which is very odd. And then also we don't treat them like they are currencies because we buy them to just save them, which Lord knows that's not how we treat normal currency. Normal currency, we get paid and then we spend it, right? Super different. And a lot of the people that I know who have really done the best in the industry were people who like sold t-shirts for Bitcoin 10 years ago. And like now they have enough Bitcoin to retire, right? So it's like people who treated Bitcoin as a currency early on really were paid off, but that's not how people treat it now. I don't know if that answers the question, but yeah, Max seems like a really great guy. I don't know anything about his currency though. Oh, I think you guys froze on my end. See if I could disable camera and then bring it back. Nope.
If it ended.
There you go.
Oh, I think we're
back for me now.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, sorry, you got cut off there. We were talking about how like now we have this need to become consumers of currency.
Right, and that's okay. So I'll pick up there and I'll say we need to become consumers of currency, except we're not exactly sure if this even is a currency. Like, yes, it's called cryptocurrency at a very like exact, you know, obvious level, but people don't treat it like currency. People treat it more as, you know, an asset that they're trying to save and make money on and stuff like that, which is not really how we treat currency. So you know, understanding what it is you're interested in about whatever it is you're buying. What are the pros? What are the cons of it? The term that I specifically would use are like, what are the unique properties of the system that aren't inherent to other things? And like what people who aren't in the space may not realize is it's not just developing the cryptocurrency that leads to success. It's also the infrastructure. So like how many exchanges are accepting that cryptocurrency? How many wallets exist for that cryptocurrency? How many developers are working on that? It's like the whole, what's the ecosystem of that market? Because really, if someone's going to create a cryptocurrency, is what they're saying is it's valuable to pay me in this coin. And it may be true for him, but is he the only person? Like, who's accepting that currency? So those are just different ways to think about it. But I do think it's mostly just a branding thing for people because people will write articles about it and whatnot.
Yeah, and I do think there was this big wave of like altcoins like a couple years back when people were really getting into it and a lot of the exchanges were popping up. And I remember, was it 2 or 3 years ago, every other day I would see an article in Bloomberg or the Wall Street Journal about how Goldman Sachs is talking about creating like a crypto fund or something like that.
Ridiculous concept.
Right.
Because in the market of currency, well, this is my belief, and you know, we'll see how long it takes to get there if it ever happens, but you don't really need a million different currencies, right? Like you don't want to buy beer and beer token, and you don't want to pay max and max token, because all that does is that adds an exchange every single time.
Right.
Like you want one currency, and like that's the one currency is the most valuable for the whole system.
And that's part of the concept of being a currency, right? Like, like a universal medium of exchange.
Right. Which is currently the dollar,
right?
The pound, the euro, those kind of things. So, I'm glad Bitcoin exists. If Bitcoin ever becomes more successful than those things, there'd be a lot of problems on our hands that exceed whether or not people understand Bitcoin.
Wait, why? I mean, if Bitcoin becomes more problem.
Yeah. So Bitcoin is, let me put it a different way. The U.S. is sort of the world's reserve currency, right? There's a basket of currencies, but let's just say like it's mostly the dollar.
Yeah.
If the dollar ever becomes so worthless that Bitcoin is worth millions of dollars, there are big problems in the world, like military instability kind of problems, because that's the only thing that would cause Bitcoin to be worth that much money. It's literally if we don't have stability in all the existing currencies. Right. Bitcoin isn't competing with the dollar in these currencies. It just exists. I don't think Bitcoin's not setting out to take over. It's not setting out to destroy the dollar. It just exists. If countries can't handle their monetary system properly and they fail, like that will be the success of Bitcoin. And like all it had to do was exist. It's a pretty clear path to victory, and it doesn't involve much effort. So
So sorry. So should I take it as a bad sign that Bitcoin went up today, like a lot? And I mean, like it was down not long ago. It just like keeps shooting up lately. I mean, I guess it's
a little complicated because, like, for instance, when coronavirus happened, Bitcoin took a huge hit, and really why that was, at least you can never I could never really explain this with certainty because I don't know everyone who bought and sold Bitcoin, but I would say that was probably because a lot of institutional investors and even just like mom and pop people, I think they were selling off their most like risky assets at the same time because coronavirus, everyone was taking this huge hit, right? So they're like, oh, massive sell off of everything. Now, right. So we saw that, and now that there's some stability, like kind of at the bottom of the economy, now, the stock market goes up, and then like people are more willing to go into risky assets again. You know, Bitcoin does well. So I wouldn't say it's like a direct correlation, but it's sort of a general statement. Like if Bitcoin ever went to like really shocking numbers, and 16,000 is shocking to me. It's shocking to anyone who owned Bitcoin under $10. Like that's shocking. That's not a good sign for the long run, because it's, the saying is like people vote with their feet, right? So it's like, why are people buying Bitcoin? Why are people looking for an alternative to fiat? And the answers to those questions are not good. Like,
yeah, I mean, I kind of look at it, and I haven't looked at like the charts and seen whether there's a direct correlation, but it seems to me like Bitcoin is like gold in that people see it as a store of value, but now, like the past couple of years with all the meme hype, it's become also like a meme investment on top of that. So it's kind of hard to tease out like who's using it as like a safe refuge anymore, who's viewing it as just like a purely ideological, like, you know, I don't want to have my money denominated in, you know, monopoly money, and then who's viewing it as just like number go up, like you said.
Right. Yeah, I mean, the full meme is green paper bad, number go up, right?
Right.
You could make it stock market bad, number go up. It's less catchy, but I mean, there's certain things that are just really weird about this economic system that we're living in. Like, I think a lot of the value investment stuff that made Warren Buffett rich, which is like buy stocks, make money off the company and never sell. Like, I don't think that stuff works really like it used to.
Yeah. There's no blue chips anymore.
Yeah, it's kind of an understatement, right? I don't think that works anymore. I think everyone is just like trying to buy assets that the value goes up to. And I think even that's the play for the Fed. So, you know, I think about your understanding of the economy as like a big building where there's different levels. And like, I think libertarians sort of have this like very low level view of the economy where they like kind of understand, well, you know, people shouldn't steal my property. That's theft, bro. So it's like, okay, yeah, like that's one view. But like another view of the economy is, I think the real play by the Fed right now, which is much higher in this building, is basically like how much money can they print to buy up everything. And this is the game that China's been playing. It's like, if you're an authoritarian country and, you know, it's in all of the private companies in China are really backed and owned by China.
Right.
And then what's happening here in the States is, okay, like all of these companies need massive bailouts, meaning that the government owns some of these major companies. Like I'm talking like NASDAQ, top, you know, like top companies in the country. The government now owns a stake in them. And we, as part of the market, we're not allowed to know what companies those are because it would change the price of those companies. So the government bought at least a stake, a large stake in 6 major companies in the US. You know, I don't know what they are, but let's just say one is Boeing, right? It's like, it's in the country's interest to own Boeing, but is it in the consumer's interest to own that? It's like, it's such a complicated game. It's such a complicated game. And like what people at the top level are really trying to do is they're trying to have control, right? And they have different arms of control. And the way they manipulate currency is just one arm. You know, COVID maybe is another arm. And look at all the people who are getting rich off this, right? It's definitely not everyone I know, because everyone I know who's a small business owner, they had to shut down indefinitely. But like Walmart, Amazon, Target, all these companies get to stay open because they're essential. It's like, like if you think about it from the perspective of the government, it is better to own a proportion of a company, even if it's not profitable, because it's cheaper to pay them through a salary at a company than it is to pay them on unemployment.
Right.
So like, it's just such a complicated, it's a complicated game they're playing at. And I'm glad that's not me doing it. All I have to do is figure out what works for me and the wolf pack, you know?
What do you think of, I mean, if Joe Biden becomes president, how would that affect that whole dynamic? Also, do you think they'll make the lockdowns even stricter and like shut down even more businesses and stuff like that? Because they said they would, but would people allow them to? Would
See, Joe Biden to me is very much like a Hillary Clinton type candidate. Like Hillary Clinton was sort of famous for saying, like, you know, it's important to have both a public and a private opinion on things. So like, you know, publicly he says he supports lockdowns, but I think he'll do whatever, his group tells him to do. I do know that Wall Street is heavily in support of Biden over Trump. Why? I can't really figure that out. I mean, to me, they're both sort of equally bad in that department, but, you know, we haven't seen Biden in action. So like, maybe he'll be worse, but I mean, the stuff that, you know, not talking about COVID at all, but just as far as like pumping the stock market, like Trump's done a very good job of making the economy look good because the stock market is so, I would say probably inflated, overvalued, overpriced. right? And I'm sure Biden will do exactly the same thing because we live in a political system that the president only has to care about what the country looks like under their 4 years. Like if they're playing a game of not dominoes, but what is it called? Jumanji or whatever.
Jenga.
Jenga, thank you. If you're playing a game of Jenga and like you're pulling the last stick out, like you don't really care as long as you get away, right? Like if you're setting the next person up for failure, the system is sort of incentivized for you to make it as hard on them as possible.
Yeah.
So I mean, Trump inherited that, and I'm sure he's going to pass that on to, if it's not Biden, whoever's after him will get a complete shit show.
Right. And I mean, I think it's going to be compounded by just demographics and that, you know, the boomers are retiring. So like they're going to be pulling all their money out of the stock market to pay for their retirement. So in terms of like a safe refuge of wealth, I would assume that there aren't a lot of boomers that have IRAs that are denominated in Bitcoin, right? So like,
well, it's funny because most of the boomers I talk to, that's always what they talk about. Like, oh, you know, you could put Bitcoin in the stock market now, and I'm like, okay. You know,
well,
like, I don't know. Millennials don't really. I don't think millennials think like that, but you know, maybe I'm wrong. Yeah, it's good that they can, but I mean, what's going to be interesting is when the boomers pass on their wealth, like whatever is left of it. Like what the next generation, what millennials, what Gen Xers do with that. I don't know, hopefully have kids or something.
Yeah, I mean, that's another thing. I mean, America's pretty much the only country in the Western world where boomers had kids. So I guess it's an open question as to whether millennials will.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I mean, more than most countries, I think on average, like 1.8 kids per couple among the boomers, maybe 2.0. Whereas, you know, you look at Britain, you look at Germany, it's like 1.5.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's, I mean, the population pyramids, I don't know if you've ever seen those.
Oh, yeah.
The healthy one looks like a Christmas tree. America's kind of a straight up and down. And then Germany's like that.
A V.
Like a V. Like
right.
Yeah. But anyway, I mean, I think
it's interesting that happened to Japan too, right? It's like the psychology of this they're just like lashing themselves. They like, it seems a little like that to me. It's like punishing them to some degree.
I think a lot of it is also just like having a very negative outlook on the future. Like you're not going to bring kids into the world if you think it's going to be a worse time than you had, right? So
I studied my family history to some degree, and there was one woman in my ancestry who had 5 Jonathans, all spelled with a different spelling because they all died. Like, wow, I'm really happy that I don't live during the plague. About COVID, it's
you
not
came from the healthy Jonathan.
What was that?
You came from the healthiest Jonathan.
Maybe. You know, I think she had more kids than just Jonathan, but yeah, 5 Jonathans, and the first spelling and then iterations on that spelling all the way down. I was like, that's crazy.
Whoa.
So, I mean, that was also pre-birth control too, right? So that's,
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of my friends are a little too black-pilled right now. They're very depressed on the outlook of life, and it's not a healthy mental state to be in.
Because of COVID or in general?
Yeah, because of COVID, because their businesses are being shut down, because there's no end in sight for them. There's no clear path. I mean, I'm really happy to work in the Bitcoin industry, but I think there's a lot of industries that could use some innovation right now. I think the school question is like huge open-ended question of like, how are kids going to school? Like any of my friends who lived in major cities who have kids are like freaking out right now because, you know, you can't really get any work done when you have kids running around, and your kids also aren't getting educated in virtual learning.
Right.
You might as well just, I don't know, not send them to school because they'll learn a lot of that shit on their own in comparison to like having them sit in front of in a Zoom room. Like it's just a joke.
I mean, that's one of the areas that I think is most ripe for innovation. And like, do you think that crypto is going to be an avenue for people to keep their businesses going during COVID? I mean, I don't know if that's been something that people have done.
I don't know. To me, what I think is the biggest value prop for Bitcoin is if I get everyone who's ideologically aligned with me to buy crypto, that benefits all of us as a tribe when in a world where Bitcoin does well.
Right.
And in a world where Bitcoin does poorly, well, you know, you probably didn't sell your house to buy it, so it's okay. I think the upside sort of beats the downside. The upside potential beats the downside risk in most cases, assuming you're being like, fairly responsible about how you're doing that. But that's certainly true for the investors early on. Like, Peter Thiel is someone who comes to mind who was a heavy investor in Bitcoin. Like, these people are ideologically anti-censorship. If not right-wing, they're very libertarian. The anti-authoritarian right. Like, those are the people who are buying Bitcoin that have the potential to make impact. So, it costs money to do a lot of these things. And you look at Elon Musk, like, what did he do with all the money that he made from PayPal? Like, he started like 3 different companies and took like every dime he had and put it into those 3 companies. So definitely people who have a shared vision of the future, buying something like Bitcoin, in a world where Bitcoin does well, it's not just Bitcoin that does well, right? It could be, the future of education that we want to see. It might be, things like crowdfunding. Like, I heard stories of people, like, I personally have helped crowdfund a lot of the activities of like looking into election stuff, and, people crowdfunded the wall. So like, there's kind of no limit to what people could be crowdfunding if they had the money to do it.
And I think that in that way, COVID might actually be good, because it like the lockdowns are kind of forcing people out of like the big cities. I mean, they're not forcing people out of their offices, but I think it's taking power away from like these big city institutions. Like, so many people are, like, I'm going into real estate, and so many people are like moving out of New York City, moving out of DC, and moving to like the suburbs. And it's just making it so much better than it was even before COVID. So maybe that it's like that for in general, like, people are choosing comfort and freedom and luxury over like being part of a big, powerful institution,
right?
City, if that makes sense.
Oh, it totally makes sense. And, I choose to believe that this is just the beginning. I was watching a video on Instagram today where a woman was talking about how she got 10 friends, and then her 10 friends got 10 friends, and they bought a parcel of land that wasn't under the jurisdiction of any particular city. So they're incorporating and becoming a city, meaning that they can create the police force, they can create schools for their city. And it's like 20 of them. And they get funding from the state to do this, because that's how cities work, apparently. And like, I learned that in a 3-minute Instagram video.
Whoa.
That's nuts.
Yeah. And I'm like, okay, like that's next level. Like, the next level is, you call it a commune, you call it a citadel. The Mormons do it over in caves. I lived in Utah for a while. There's like caves carved into the rocks, and they just like buy the whole landmass. Then every family like picks a little hole in the wall. I mean, there's a lot of different ways to, rebel against the system as it exists. You don't have to live in a city and pay $5,000 a month to, basically live in a first world country with third world problems on your doorstep. Like, that doesn't make any sense. Like, it's very hard to rationalize, especially in a world with COVID.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, like, when there are, we always complain on the right about how socialism is, having this upsurge in popularity, but like, the one thing that they do get right in a sense is that there has been redistribution to the, certain institutions, but it's through the monetary system. It's through quantitative easing. You're dumping trillions of dollars into these, Fortune 500 companies.
Yeah.
So it's like, look, like, that doesn't mean that, their diagnosis is correct as to, how that's occurring. They think it's, freedom that's causing that. But
it's kind of laughable, huh?
Yeah. It's absurd.
Very simplistic.
Right.
Some people are just very simple. Okay.
Yeah.
I have a question. Sorry, just out of curiosity. First of all, I love the bottom of your mug.
Oh yeah. It also, on this side, it says Bitcoin is fuck you money.
And then it has like a middle finger on the bottom.
That's great.
That's out of coffee.
And Dove says, here's $5. Good night. Bitcoin to the moon.
Number go up. No, I love it.
Yeah.
Good night.
So I'm curious. So you mentioned earlier, like, working in the Bitcoin industry. is it possible to work in the Bitcoin industry in the way that you would in like a different financial industry? Like, can you be like a Bitcoin broker or like a Bitcoin
I don't know about brokers.
lender or Bitcoin, like stuff like that?
Well, you could definitely work at a Bitcoin company and be a lawyer.
A Bitcoin lawyer, interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I know a number of those that have their own practice and they just do just Bitcoin stuff because there's a lot of legality questions that need to be solved. People have very basic, often there's just basic questions that people have and, you know, they want to consult a lawyer. I work in IT, so like my job is a job that exists at probably every tech company, but just I also happen to do it at a Bitcoin company. So I don't know if that quite answers the question, but yeah, it's very similar to the financial industry in that we're a company that does all the same things a company typically does. Like, yeah, we have lawyers, we have IT, we have developers, we have designers, like all that stuff.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah. The only difference is that we have people at our company who directly work on Bitcoin.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. So Bitcoin is open source, so no one gets paid to work on Bitcoin.
Right.
It's kind of like working, if you've ever heard the term Linux, it's like an operating system and people don't get paid to work on that, right? So, well, maybe they do but that's a little, there's different brands of Linux, there's different flavors of Linux, so we won't get into that. But yeah, so originally our company was founded to do like XYZ things in the industry, but then in addition to that, we also hired core devs who weren't getting paid otherwise. So it's kind of like mutually beneficial because they get a salary and then you get like the best consultants in the space on the technology that you're building products for.
So wait, so you're working on Bitcoin itself, and like, what's your objective? Sorry.
No, that's a great question. That's a great question. So when someone becomes a core dev and is contributing to Bitcoin, what that typically looks like. So in the early days, it was the people who happen to be really good cryptographers. Like in order to be a core dev, you had to be a cryptographer, you had to be a wizard developer, you had to understand economics, and you had to not be a massive dick. Right. And then like those 4 things, if you could do all those things, then you could contribute in a way that would allow like that worked with the group. So, you know, the objective for that was scaling improvements mostly. So like if they would find, let's say they found bugs, let's say they found a way to improve efficiency, then they would make those changes. There's like SegWit, which actually isn't so recent anymore, but you know, there's constantly improvement protocols that are proposed and then accepted into Bitcoin to make Bitcoin more efficient, have less storage requirements, basically so that more people can run Bitcoin for cheaper. One of the technologies that we developed at our company called Blockstream is we created this thing called Bitcoin Satellite, and I don't think we make any money off that right now. It could be wrong, but basically what that allows you to do is it allows you, so most people who are sending Bitcoin, they're using like the peer-to-peer, if you remember Torrent and Napster, right? Like peer-to-peer was like really big.
Yeah, I remember Napster.
Yeah, so that peer-to-peer then was file sharing. Peer-to-peer in Bitcoin was like, oh, I run my own Bitcoin node. Which means I run my own instance of the blockchain that is all synchronized to the same state that we talked about. So like I run that, you run your own version, I'm sending you Bitcoin. That's kind of how most people use it, like technical people. And then what we did with Bitcoin Satellite is we made it so you could you could do things over satellite. So if you didn't even have access to your own full node, you could still get information over satellite. The reason why this is interesting is because people who are in countries where the internet is censored by their government could potentially be at risk of censorship. So in China, well, let me compare it. So the United States has the most connections outside of the US. Like when you're connecting to the internet, the number of wires, direct wires that go from the US outside is higher than any other country, to my knowledge. In China, because it's a communist country, those wires are owned by the Chinese government. So even though you make Bitcoin payments and those aren't censored, it could be very difficult to get your traffic out of the country, which is like how things like that's, you know, everyone's heard of the Chinese firewall and stuff like that, right? Yeah. So the reason why we created Satellite is to help people in those instances. So if another example is like Russia, they actually did a test where they wanted to see if they could shut down the internet in Russia. because they own the wires just like because they used to be a communist country. So they have control of all the ins and outs of the internet to their country. And if they were to ever do that, then the satellite would be of use. So gosh, we're doing things like there's a new protocol called Lightning where you can like make transactions a lot faster than you can on the blockchain. It's like really exciting stuff, but because it's protocol development, it just takes a long time. So it's like, it's not like Facebook pushing a new GUI, you know, it's like, oh, like that stuff doesn't take 5 years to develop. And a lot of this stuff kind of does, because it's like, what is it, like a multi-billion-dollar industry, trillion, I don't even know how much money is in the market cap of Bitcoin, but you probably don't want to make mistakes. So it's really important that code be secure.
Right.
And so if you do make mistakes, then what happens? Like someone here in the chat room said something about like people getting their Bitcoin hacked and stuff like that. Is that a problem with coding?
I think it was.
No, so the way that I explain it, so we talked about how there's like, we talked about how there's like everyone can run their own blockchain, but there's also like instances of the blockchain. So there's like multiple, right? And they're all synchronized to the same state. What doesn't exist on the blockchain are these things called private keys. You can have your private keys on your computer. You could have them on your phone. You can have them on basically any small computer that's capable. You could store them in your head because you can convert them into words. Like you can write your private key down on a piece of paper. It's just data. Now, the fact that people mismanage their data should not surprise any of us. So yeah, like people lose their Bitcoin because they mismanage their data. And that's probably the instance what they're talking about is like people get their keys stolen because they left it on, you know, keys.txt on their desktop.
Yeah.
That's not a secure way of storing your keys.
Okay.
That's when it's like, oh, that's when you have to, that's kind of gets into the nerdy thing, right? Is like, how do you store your data? If you have the responsibility of owning your money, like for real, like, you know, if you spend money on a credit card and then you decide that like you want your money back, you can call them and they'll usually refund you. Like you're like, oh, I didn't mean to do that, or someone took my card, or I didn't mean it's called a chargeback, right? And this like really hurts merchants. But it basically every credit card company will do it under a certain value. You can't do that in Bitcoin. You know, if you lose your Bitcoin, if you lose access to your private keys, that's on you. And I mean, it makes everyone else's Bitcoin more valuable. So no one really has any empathy for that. There's no Bitcoin IT support line you can call.
Right.
You're just kind of out of luck. But that's what's so cool about it is you do the full responsibility. It means exactly that.
Bitcoin is irreplaceable.
Say that again?
Like that Bitcoin that you had is irreplaceable. No one can make a new version of that.
Nope.
It's cool.
Yeah, it's really cool. It's not what we're used to though. So it does take time for people to adapt to that level of of kind of just insanity. I mean, we're all so used to being able to call up PayPal and being like, hey man, I didn't really mean to send that money. Can you send it back?
And I wonder how much that's just due to government meddling with everything. Like, you know, if it weren't for the FDIC, wouldn't be able to, I mean, you'd have runs on the bank and then the bank would close down. And, you know, if you were too far back in line, you'd be SOL and you wouldn't get your money if you were trying to withdraw it. So, like, I guess it's a similar concept. Like, you are responsible for it at the end of the day.
Yeah, and I mean, there's so many different ways to do that now. Like, you know, for anyone who's interested in exchanges, there's one exchange called River, and that they only sell Bitcoin. They don't sell other cryptocurrencies, which can remove a lot of the noise for people. So you're not like having to like figure out like what chain coin is or what like Bitcoin 2.0 is. Like they just do Bitcoin. And you know, I would say their security is probably top notch compared to other exchanges. So you know, you could choose to be a nerd and hold your crypto, or you know, you could buy Bitcoin in the stock market, and that'll probably work out okay. That historically it hasn't always. Sometimes exchanges get hacked, meaning like sometimes they don't store their Bitcoin properly.
Right.
Sometimes they write their password on a napkin and then leave it by their desk, and you know, that's a real thing that happens, not just in Bitcoin, but in the mainstream financial industry. It just so happens that with Bitcoin, it makes a better article. So like people write about it when it happens. So, oh, Bitcoin got hacked again. I guess Boomer Dad is gonna have to sell his Bitcoin. It's broken now. Yeah.
That's funny. We got a subscriber who asks us, what kind of system do you need to mine Bitcoin? I've heard you need a really high-end system.
Yeah, so the evolution of mining looks like this. It used to be CPU power, which is basically just like what all computers have. And then they're like, okay, well, that mining was, you know, kind of child's play, like let's step it up. And then people started using GPU mining. Then they moved into ASICs. And ASICs, to understand ASICs are simply a machine. It's a computer hardware piece that's literally only designed to do one thing. And that one thing is whatever one thing you pick. So these Bitcoin ASICs are only designed to do the computation that does mining. Obviously, if something's specialized, it's better, right? So it's specialized to do just that one thing. That being said, it's a very complicated thing to be getting into mining, and only really the best, you know, unless you're getting free electricity, I would say that it's probably not profitable to mine, and it's probably not worth the headache. It could be interesting, but I don't think it's like worthwhile from like a purely like monetary standpoint, like a rational standpoint. I think it's interesting and fun, and it could be profitable if you were like extremely good at it. Good meaning like, you know, you've built out some like mining factories in the past. I don't think like the average person can really make that work anymore, unless they live maybe in Venezuela, in which case the returns are diminished for other reasons.
Right.
Okay, so we're gonna let you go soon because it's been, you know, you've given us so much valuable time, and I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for coming
I also wanted to ask you, so this is really random, but I remember the video of you when you were like pepper sprayed on the face,
yes,
on your face. Is that after, that was before you wrote this book? Yes,
that was before I wrote this book. Yeah.
So like, what happened? Oh,
we should have led with this.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, so back in 2016, and during like, it was right after the election, I had gone to like the Milo at Cal event, which was probably the event where all the powers that be decided that he was he was on the naughty list, so to speak. So he is removed from polite,
right?
Yeah. What's that?
Oh, okay. In Berkeley.
Yeah, so it was before the country knew what Antifa was. Yeah, I was doing an interview about the difference between hate speech and free speech, and I was wearing a Make Bitcoin Great Again hat. And there was a guy who was like, yeah, like, you're just speaking hate speech, which by the way is a terrible, like it's a defamatory way to speak to someone, to say that they're, to claim that they're speaking hate speech. I hadn't even spoke yet. And I was like, well, how do you define hate speech? You know, I broke the guy's brain in about 3 or 4 different ways, basically saying like hate speech can't just be whatever you don't like, right? That can't possibly be the definition because, you know, anyway, so we were getting into this kind of stage debate because it was filmed. And then like, you know, a couple minutes later, I get interviewed by someone else, and then I get maced live on television, and it was just, it was like a whole ordeal. So that was the first time I heard about Antifa and the last time I confronted them.
Okay, I have this one right here. This is my first time using this share screen.
Oh, nice, good job.
This is
more than you think.
Is this person like spraying your face? I watched that video like on replay like a few times. I think it was like one of my first times seeing people like being violent towards, like, I mean, my first time paying attention to it.
Sure. No, I mean, I literally, just for shits and giggles, my friend who, one of my best friends was with me, and he's like, hey, look, I brought some friends, and they were chanting, no fascist USA. And I was like, so naive. I was like, yeah, no fascist USA. And then they're like, you know, like, I don't know, right after that, right after I got maced there, because I was talking to a journalist at that time, it happened again, like, and it was like 10 times worse the next time that it happened. Like, it's really, this is actually, you know, I'm still on Twitter, but this is why I can't even comment on people that this has happened to, because it's just painful to watch. Like, it's painful to watch anyone be totally torn apart like that. Like, it definitely leaves an impact. You know, like have you seen the meme of the NPC character?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's what I think of every time I look at one of these people, because I'm both angry while at the same time having empathy, because I know a lot of the people who are in this ideology, it's extremely toxic to them. Like, a lot of the people who are in Antifa are not healthy people. Like, these are people with extremely damaged lives, no hope, lots of fear. You know, they're projecting me as to be like this radical person, or anyone who they're attacking to be this radical person, because the media taught them that, and probably their professors too. But it's a really devastating ideology to hold, and so it's really hard to even hold it against them. And maybe I'm weak in that way. But yeah, that shit was crazy. And for whatever I could contribute to the country's understanding of Antifa, I'm happy to have done it, because now we all know what Antifa is.
Yeah, I mean, I remember reading about them and hearing about them from my friends in Europe, like way before
Yes.
they came here. And I just remember seeing like, wait, they're here now? Like,
Mhm.
I don't think it was really, I mean, obviously it must have existed, but they weren't out in
Started
the
in
street.
Germany.
Yeah, they weren't.
Well, they used to go to animal rights events.
Oh.
And they would terrorize people at animal rights events. So they would, like, I mean, I don't know the details, but they do the same shit that they would do now. You know, light shit on fire, you know, punch people, like sucker punch people behind their head and stuff like that. But it's definitely escalated. And I don't know how there's really just a misunderstanding of what Antifa is for anyone who disagrees with it. Because if you ever confront it up close in person, there's no way that you could say that that was a sane ideology or produce any kind of good in the world. That chaotic good is never actually any good.
Yeah, I mean, I think you look at their statements of purpose and stuff, and it's like, this is chaotic evil. This is like pure nihilism.
Right.
Like destruction for its own sake. And I mean, they go out there and they actually live that too. They're not just talking about it like the professors.
And
Right.
usually a lot of them experience trauma.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, a lot of the people that you talk to who either are in or used to be part of Antifa, like, describe childhood trauma and like just like a ton of issues that brought them to that place. Like,
No, that's definitely true. I mean, I lived in California. I spent some time living in Berkeley, and a lot of those people were what we would call street kids. Like, they lived on the street, dressed in all black, and did drugs. And like, to them, doing good was stealing food for their friend, or like stealing a cigarette for their friend. It was like this loyalty thing. It's like a weird subculture. And now they're elevated to the point where I was with, I think it was Lauren Southern, and she was dressed like this Antifa person to sort of like be edgy and stuff like that. And people were giving her high fives in the street because they didn't know who she was. It was like, if you are Antifa, you have status now in polite society because you're doing good, according to people who live in Berkeley.
yeah, it's like you have a moral high ground because you're punching Nazis.
I literally had professors who were telling me
Nazis.
like it's this inverted like truth where they're saying like, yeah, if it weren't for Antifa, the Proud Boys would have killed everybody in Charlottesville. And I was like,
there certainly were radical people with questionable morals at that thing. I would have never gone to that.
no.
The problem is it was way more nuanced than anyone's allowed to say online.
Right. And like to have the professor, it wasn't even like she was saying it as like, this is, you know, this counter narrative, but it was like, this is the truth. This is the objective fact. This is what I know because I read it in the Guardian. And I was like, whoa, dude.
Yeah.
Anyway.
I mean, when that happened to me too, I was so, I you know, going viral, for anyone that hasn't happened to, is a real experience. Like, that'll put you through it because, you know, there's a lot of people who try to become famous, and like, that's very different because you have the constant goal of fame and attention. But like, when you
have control over your image. You
have control, right? When this happened to Jordan Peterson, he had hundreds of hours of content that people could watch to build to sort of like take back his name. But when you're not known, you have no platform, like it's extremely difficult it's impossible actually to control the narrative. And you know, at some point I had to like let go of control and say like, what do I want to do with this? Because, you know, it was a lot of unpleasant attention. I was getting recognized at bars that I would go to in San Francisco. And like with people, like I met this guy who had a Antifa cross-stitched on his little keychain, and he had some words to say to me. And like, yeah, it was just a lot. So I was like, okay, do I want to, you know, like Andy No, who's a journalist,
Yeah.
right? He gets attacked by Antifa, and now, you know, you kind of become, in a way, he's sort of like a professional victim now, right? Because he has to constantly relive that. And although, you know, it can be interesting when things like that happen to you, it's complex, and it's not necessarily something that I would want to do again. So,
Yeah.
you know, it takes tough skin and probably a more extroverted person than me. So for me, I think focusing on things that I can actually have impact on. Like I probably had more impact on public opinion by getting maced than I ever could have with voting, which is one way to look at it. But in another way, it's like,
to leave San Francisco in general.
oh yeah, I left. And I think any sane person should too, if they can. Absolutely, there's no buts to that. You should definitely leave San Francisco.
And I'm sure that like really contributed to it, like getting maced, feeling like some kind of public enemy because you're there.
And for context, this happened to 9 other people that I was with, and none of them were talking. Like, none of them got any media attention for that. So there's also this sort of layer of randomness to it, because a lot of people were hurt. I mean, my friend had his ribs broken. And then, yeah, and I was getting requests for interviews, and I'd be like, okay, but you need to report on my friend who had his ribs broken. And then they'd be like, oh yeah, no problem. And then they wouldn't. Right. And actually the only people who really gave me fair live coverage, meaning like I can go into a studio and speak live, was RT. Right. And it's like, whoa. Thanks.
Yeah.
A lot of credibility. Like any liberal that watches that is going to be like, oh, it's RT, and they're going to blow it off. And I was saying that I did an interview which was talking about the difference between hate speech and free speech. They would cut that part off. I would say like, hey, it looks like a lot of the people here are peaceful, but you know, not all of them. And like they'd cut the peaceful part off. And it was just, I got a master's class in how to deal with the media, because I never knew it was that bad. I never knew it was that bad, but you know, it's good to know. I have a whole different perspective now, because you know, Donald Trump is at a totally different level. And this is something the whole Republican Party after Trump needs to realize. Like some of the best candidates in the Republican Party get no media attention.
Right.
You know, and it's, you know, I don't necessarily have a solution for that, but knowing is at least half the battle. And, you know, if Donald Trump did anything, which I would argue he probably didn't do much in terms of being in office, but if he did anything, really brought awareness to the distrust of the media. And hey, if he wins any of these court cases, I think a lot of liberals are going to start agreeing with him.
Yeah, I mean, that's the turning the camera back around at the media and showing like the American people, or at least half the American public, like, look at how, like, you used to complain about it was biased, but you didn't recognize that it was to this level.
Oh yeah. And everyone, like, once people have their own personal experience, it takes it to a next level. But I mean, even with this election stuff, like normal people are saying, that doesn't seem normal. Like there's fraud in every election. So for media, for news agencies to be like, no fraud, zero fraud, no proof of fraud. It's like every large system has fraud. Like, what are you talking about? Like, the question is how much fraud, not like no fraud. Right. So it's just like blatant. It's insulting to people's intelligence at this point.
Yeah, and it's like fact checking everyone's tweet that even mentions the word fraud. We did a live stream talking about how Nixon had the election stolen from him by Kennedy and the mafia in 1960, and they fact checked us. They said, "Oh, like the 2020 elections have no evidence of fraud." And
no evidence whatsoever.
They also they limited monetization on that video.
About an election 60 years ago.
Yeah.
Like,
because you can't say anything positive about Nixon.
I think that's part of it too. Like, As somebody who doesn't like Nixon in a lot of his policies, like he won that election fair and square, and I guess Kennedy's people would argue that they stole it fair and square. But
hey, I mean, at least they're being honest about something. And something that I sent you an article about this, about liberals and conservatives. We were talking about Moldbug before. And
I started watching his stuff, by the way. I started watching his interviews and stuff, and I was reading that article.
Yeah. He made the point that is totally correct. It's like conservatives view power as a means to an end. It's like this tool, right? It's like Thor's hammer that you can wield and like have some justice. But, you know, liberals just view power as an end in itself. And all power is just a reason to expand and have more power. And you see this in every policy that is coming from the left. It's like how many more government industries do you need?
yeah.
We're gonna make sure that the government doesn't just take care of healthcare, but they'll be the sole provider of healthcare. Like what they are taking over education. Everything is just expand. And conservatives do not have. They don't exactly do a very good job of cutting back on that narrative, because you know they're fighting without high ground.
They're trying so hard to like speak to that audience, and it drives me nuts.
It's something that I ran like you give them the moral high ground and you're playing on their playing field, you've already lost the argument because you've conceded the principle. If you're gonna play games like Paul Ryan, like, okay, well, we can pay for senior citizens healthcare, but like we'll privatize it, but we'll still fund all of it. Well, then what's the point? Well, you're fighting with like both arms tied behind your back at that point.
Right.
You know? But
so I don't know if the will is really there, but we'll see. We'll see what comes of it, and we probably should leave on a more positive note.
Yeah.
I think no matter what happens, it'll be interesting.
Yeah.
Yes.
We'll be along for the ride.
And everybody, if you haven't already, which you probably have, but just in case you haven't, like this video on YouTube and check out Kiara's book. The link is in the description on YouTube, and I will reshare it on Twitter.
And do you have any social media that we should plug?
Yeah, you guys, if anyone, for people watching, come check me out on my YouTube channel. I talk about Bitcoin. I'm gonna start talking about myths and other stuff on there too.
I'll include the link also. I'll find your YouTube channel and I'll include the links.
Yeah, that sounds good. Other than that, it was just great chatting with you guys. It's a fun hour and a half.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You too. And it'd be awesome to do it again sometime.
Sounds good. And keep doing the streaming every day and stuff like that. I'll tune in next time.
This will Jordan Peterson someday. It's gonna be like kapow. And like every once in a while I'll see like one of my videos that had like 11 views. It will like kapow to like 2,000 or something. There are a few of those videos that I happen to. And so I'm just like, okay, this is gonna be like one of those channels.
Just consistency.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Talk to you guys later.
You too. See you guys tomorrow.